to do something on the screen. All right. Okay, I think we're going to start. We're going to start. Welcome, everybody, to this month's first BCM webinar of the year, which is also serving as a peek into and a promotion of next month's Bartimaeus Kinsler Institute. And we are so delighted tonight to have join us our two main guests of honor in next month's Institute. On your screen to the right, broadcasting from the Open Door community in Atlanta, Georgia, is Dr. Kathryn Meeks, and Elaine will introduce Kathryn in a few minutes. So welcome, Kathryn. We're so happy to have you with us from across the country.
Thank you. It's just an honor to be a part of this tonight. I'm delighted.
Thank you. And sitting between us is a local friend, Pamela Brubaker. Dr. Brubaker is a neighbor here in Ventura County. She's from the other side of the county and has done us the honor of coming in to be live in the studio tonight with us. And after we interview Dr. Meeks, we will in turn interview Dr. Brubaker. And we're so delighted to have these two amazing women elders, mentors, teachers who you all get to also be with next month if you join us in our institute. We're starting our 5th year of monthly webinars, and this is our 9th year of holding annual institutes here in the Ventura River watershed. So we thought we would begin tonight with a little bit of a teaser by looking back and looking forward. Last year, most of you will recall that we held our biggest institute ever here in Oakview. It was our Festival of Radical Discipleship. It was held in February. And we've got a few pictures here that we're going to show you to entice you. There were more than 175 folks joined us last year. This is a shot of Forest Home Camp, where we will be again next month. You can see what beautiful weather we had last year. We can't guarantee the weather this year, particularly with El Nino coming, but we certainly hope that we get some rain. But Camp Forest Home is beautiful whether it's rain or shine. It's a lot of outdoor space as well as indoor space, lots of walking space under beautiful native chaparral, oak trees, sycamore. Say something about the food, Elaine.
Yeah, the food was delicious. Halfway through our time at the camp, our folks were so engaging and friendly with the kitchen staff that they really started putting on some fabulous food for us. It was very good, and we got some special treats. Plentiful food and good. We had lots of small groups doing work outside, and lots of space on this campus to go for hikes and spread out and have conversation together.
We had a variety of small focus classes, as we will again this coming year at the Institute last year, as well as larger plenary presentations. It was such an embarrassment of riches last year, with people from all over North America and beyond coming to join us. Lots of resource people, a rich diversity of folk. And then we had a whole raft of workshops on all sorts of different relevant topics. Some were held outside because the weather was so great, others inside. So the institutes typically are times for serious learning and conversation, interaction. It's also a time for kindred spirits from all over the country to sort of converge, a little bit of a gathering of the tribe of people who are themselves working between sanctuary Seminary, Street, and Soil.
And I believe this one may be the poetry. There was a workshop on poetry, so there's always a wonderful combination, and again, embarrassment of riches of the arts, whether that is music or poetry or the visual arts. And this is a part of our Wednesday morning liturgy where we were anointing each other with oil.
Last year happened to fall on Ash Wednesday. This year, I think we are already in the Lenten period. But every day we have prayer and worship. And then we have a lot of cool art stuff going on.
We do. This is Dmitry Kadyev, who did a beautiful mural for us and painted that during the Institute. And so if you felt so led, you could come and join Dmitry, pick up a paintbrush, and help out in creating a really beautiful mural, which we will also have on display at the Institute this year.
We also had world-class artist and Methodist minister Ted Litton-Hatton doing ephemeral art all around the campus. This was a birdseed painting that was done outside on one of the tables, and by the end of the Institute, it was almost all eaten up by the birds, which was its purpose. Elaine, what can you say about the Carnaval De Resistance?
This is such a fabulous work of art. Again, these young folks under the leadership of Tevin East and Jay Beck do a wonderful, this is their water show that is full of dancing and artistic expression of the struggles around eco-justice and climate change. It's a very powerful performance of song and dance and theater, scripture, and storytelling.
And of course, where would we be without the music? We always have lots of music. People bring their instruments, people jam, people contribute. It's a fabulous time. And I don't know what to say about this, except this was a rare appearance of the arch squiship of the Ventura watershed. And don't really even know what to say about this, except who knows, maybe he'll make another cameo appearance next month. And this is our setting. We are nestled in the Ojai Valley, surrounded by beautiful mountains, at the heart of the Ventura River watershed. And Camp Forest Home is a beautiful venue for this institute. So if it's not the people, it's the place. Elaine, you want to issue a formal invitation to our listeners to consider joining us if they're not already intending?
Yes. We would be delighted if all of you that are listening tonight and you folks that are going to view this in the next couple of weeks to join us at our 2016 Kinsler Institute, where we are going to look at landscapes of trauma and stories of healing, focusing on the women in Luke's gospel. And again, with Katherine and Pamela being a part of our teaching team, and we'll look at a few others that are going to be with us. It promises to be a very rich week. So please let us know that you are coming, and for sure register by February 5th. That is our cutoff date when we can't accept any more registrations after that. So please let us know that you are coming.
This year we are directly inspired by last year's festival. We decided to continue our experiments in diversification. So this year the architecture of the week is our full days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, will begin after worship with morning focus classes from 9 to noon. And we're going to have 5 classes, each of which we are excited about, and you'll have the opportunity to choose one of these courses. Elaine, what do you want to say about this one?
I will go ahead and read some class descriptions to you. This first one is going to look at the impacts of traumatic events on individuals, families, and communities, at historic and current experiences of trauma, and how they are processed and held by individuals and communities. And then we're going to overview different types of healing tools, including spiritual practices, therapy, community processes, and body work. And so our guests include Rick Kidd, a licensed marriage and family therapist who has actually been a part of our Bartimaeus community since the very beginning, our first board chair for BCM. Sue Park Herr, then is Dr. Kathryn Meeks, who we will meet a little bit more this evening. Sue Park Herr is a director of reconciliation and is working on trauma issues in the Korean community. And then Jennifer Henry from Kairos, Canada. And I think she will be speaking to us about working for justice and the struggle for justice for Indigenous women in Canada.
Well, okay. Elaine's going to read the...
We wrote up some class descriptions and thought this will be the quickest way because we might talk too much. So Pam is going to facilitate this class, and here what's going to happen is exploring what women of faith are doing locally, nationally, and internationally to advocate and act for justice and peacemaking. Pamela is Professor Emeritus of Religion at California Lutheran University and has published on economic globalization, feminist studies, and Christian ethics. So here, guests include, we're also going to have Katherine be a part of this class, and then activist Grecia Reyes from Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, Christian Peacemaker Team, Columbia staff, Caldwell Manors, and then also our dear friends and neighbors of the Abundant Table Farm Project. And you see Sarah Nolan there right in the center, and then to the right is Reina Ortega, and they are going to be a part of this class. You should do this one, huh?
You've heard us crowing about this. We are really delighted. This is a first for a Bartimaeus Institute. For the first time, we are offering an introduction to New Testament Greek. Our dear friend and colleague, Bill Richards, Professor of New Testament from Saskatoon Theological Union, is traveling down and will be with us to lead this class. This is a 15-hour intensive, so if you're interested in taking Greek, be sure and come early and stay a little later because it starts Monday afternoon and ends Friday afternoon. You'll get 15 hours of Greek and you'll be reading a little bit of Greek by the end of the week, right out of Mark's Gospel. Bill is a wonderful teacher and we are so delighted. This is also a potential for getting seminary credit with another 15 hours of online with Bill afterwards. So we could not commend, this is a great and unique opportunity trying to break these sorts of competences free from the monopoly of the university and bring Greek to the people. So we're really excited about that, but we're not done.
This class, Walking the Path of Healing in Marriage, Lindsay and Tommy Airy, who are our Detroit staff in Detroit, are going to come and lead this marriage retreat, marriage class. So this class is limited to 3 couples. So if you are in a committed relationship and want to work on your marriage, this class is for you. This is how Lindsay describes it. Participants will be introduced to the Restoration Family Systems approach and given hands-on experience and tools for identifying, working through, and healing personal pain as it comes up within the laboratory of their marriages. Lindsay is a California licensed marriage and family therapist. Tommy received his theological training at Fuller Seminary and writes and co-edits for radicaldiscipleship.net. They have been facilitating these Marriage Strong, Movement Strong groups over the past 3 years and currently work in Detroit as BCM Mission Associates with St. Peter's Episcopal Church and We the People.
And last and least, but if you can't figure anything else out to do, you can always study reading and preaching Luke's Gospel in this lectionary year with me. Would be delighted to have you join that as well. As you can see, this is a variety of approaches that affirm both the political and the personal, the academic and the activist, and that's what the Bartimaeus Institute is all about. But we're not done yet, because we also have evening plenaries.
Yes, again, you've heard a little bit about Jennifer, and you will hear more about Pamela, but we are delighted to have a open panel where everyone will be together to talk about women and justice. And both of these women have such tremendous experience in doing this work globally, and so we're very excited about this panel. We're also excited about Katherine offering the work that she is currently doing. We met Katherine again at the Proctor Institute in July and heard a little bit about the work that she is doing in terms of commemorating the lynching sites in Georgia through the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. And so tonight, both Pamela and Katherine will just give you teasers of what they are going to be talking about in their classes and plenaries. But we are just so fortunate to have these two women being a part of this with us.
And Thursday night will be panels, performances, parties. It's always a great blowout. And then we also have afternoon plenaries in which Elaine and I will come at the theme of the week from a scriptural perspective on one hand and from a practical perspective on the other hand. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, the picture here, I just completed a Doctor of Ministry degree where I looked at the transmission of intergenerational trauma. Part of what I looked at was that and its impact on my community. So we'll be looking at how trauma impacts us, how it is passed down intergenerationally, and also how we build resilience as individuals and communities.
And if that's not enough to entice you to come to California in the dead of winter, then the beauty, the extraordinary beauty of this watershed will be. This is a picture by our colleague Tim Nassiger, taken just last week after a storm rolled through and blanketed the Topa Topa Range, which you can see from our house and you can see from Camp Forest Home. It's such a beautiful area, and we really want to encourage you to join us. If you can't make it, sponsor somebody else to come. Help them come. We know it's a big thing to come out to California and to take 5 days, but no one who has done this has regretted it. It's always a real highlight of the year for folks. So there's the ubiquitous website to register. Early registration ends this Friday, so that's a good deadline to aim for. And February 5th is our drop deadline. If you can't make it, after you've made sure that one of your friends or colleagues can come, we will be doing a live look-in webinar next month from the Institute. And Chris, if you could chat in the date of that webinar, because I don't have it in front of me. It's Tuesday of the webinar week, so you can join us for that afternoon time. It'll be a little earlier than usual, and we'll give you a live look-in to the Institute. So we hope you come join us.
Please do.
Now on to the main event.
Yes, here we go. I am delighted to introduce Kathryn Meeks. We are again so thrilled, Kathryn, that you are joining us. Kathryn is
Thank you.
Retired Clara Carter Acree Distinguished Professor of Sociocultural Studies, an author, community and wellness activist, and a midwife to the soul. Her PhD focus was on Jungian psychology, African and African American women's literature, and her dissertation title is this: The Mule of the World, an exploration into sexist oppression with Zora Neale Hurston and Alice Walker. For 25 years, Katherine taught African American Studies at Mercer University. After that, she spent 2 years serving as a loaned executive to the mayor's office in the city of Macon, directing the mayor's youth violence task force. Because of this high-profile job, she was invited by the Wesleyan College faculty to join as the Clara Carter Acree Distinguished Professor, and this position she held until her retirement in 2008. Her community involvement includes director of Aunt Maggie's Kitchen Table, a family resource center located in a public housing facility, organizer of Standing on Their Shoulders, a celebration of the wisdom of African American women, and founding member of the Center for Racial Understanding. Currently, she is chair of the beloved community Commission for Dismantling Racism and the Commission on Spiritual Growth for the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. Katherine is the author of 5 books and has received the following. I'm only going to name a few of the many awards that she has received. Georgia Sociologist of the Year, NAACP Earl Shinholster Freedom Fund Award, and the W.E.B. Du Bois Award for Distinguished Community Service. Again, Katherine, thank you very much for being a part of this webinar, and then also for joining us in February.
Well, I'm delighted, and thank you for having me.
Well, we have a number of questions that we would like to put before you tonight. And the first one is that we would be interested in hearing about your journey of faith, what maybe the early influences were, and since our institute in February is focused on women, who were the women that mentored you in your faith journey?
Yeah, I love talking about that. When I was a little child of 8 years old, I lived in Arkansas with my family. My father was a sharecropper and my mother a school teacher who graduated from college the same year that I graduated from high school, which meant that my mom went to college all 18 years because there weren't schools where she could just go and take classes. She had to take correspondence classes and go to extension courses and all kinds of things. So I learned an awful lot from Mama about the importance of education. My father was an illiterate sharecropper who could not sign his name. So when he needed to go someplace and have his name signed, he would take me with him and make his X, and then I would write his name. So, I was very influenced by the fact that we lived on other people's land, and I think sharecropping's really just basically glorified slavery. And I watched my father bear up under the burden of being a sharecropper and never being able to get ahead. But in spite of that, he loved the land, and he taught me a lot about loving the land. And so as a little kid of 8 years old, I used to get up and go sit on the back door steps and watch the sun rise and just kind of welcome the morning by myself and pray. Even though at 8 years old, I wasn't quite sure who I was praying to. Somebody I called God, but I wasn't quite sure what that was all about. But what I did know was that I believed that there was something bigger and better than our little farm and the smallness of our lives that I could call out to. So, and no one's ever said to me that was a good idea to go and do that. So that's a kind of an intuitive thing that I think, reminds me a little bit of Samuel being awakened by God because he's being called. I kind of think God was nudging me to get on that path because I've been on that path now. I'll be 70 in February, and I've been on that path since I was 8 years old, at least. And as far as the women that influenced me, my mother, of course, was the biggest influence, and she never said a lot about education or the importance of it, but she mirrored that for us by her constant quest to get her own college degree. And she had this motto that tomorrow's another day, so you don't ever have to be in despair because you get up in the morning and you have another chance to solve a problem. She also used to talk about if you get to the end of the rope, just tie a knot in it and hang on because tomorrow's coming. So she taught me a lot about perseverance and vigilance and patience, and without really saying a whole lot, just watching her. She was pretty much an artist. She could go in the kitchen, you wouldn't think there was anything in there to fix, and then she just filled the table up with all these wonderful meal things for a meal. And if I went in the kitchen, I didn't see anything to eat actually, but Mama could make a feast out of what looked like nothing. So she had a profound effect upon me. And my aunt Cecil, who had no children, was the one who always gave us coats and shoes for school and to make sure we had little new dresses when it was Easter or something. So there was that kind of combination of being nurtured and cared for and provided for, but also learning both by their behavior and a little bit of what these women said about the need to really stay focused and to have a plan for yourself and always the quest for education. Education was the key element of everything. You had to become educated, or else your destiny was to clean some white woman's kitchen for the rest of your life or pick cotton. And those were not options that I was planning on taking up. So I loved to read and study, and I loved school. The kids at school hated me because I always had my homework. I never went to school in my life without my homework being done because I loved school. And I'd go to school if I were sick because I absolutely loved school because I loved to learn, and I still love to learn. So, and I learned that from my mother and my aunt, that my aunt could build things. I mean, my mother built the lunchroom onto her one-room schoolhouse because she taught grades 1 through 8, and she had all the kids in one grade and me in one room, and then she needed a lunchroom, so she and her kids built a lunchroom. I have no patience with people who just look at problems, because I grew up with these women who didn't look at problems. They looked at how can you solve this? I mean, if something's gone wrong, you look for what you can do about it. You don't stand around lamenting about it. And that's, I'm thankful for the gift of that.
And clearly you live that out as well. You are,
Yes.
in your work and in your commitments. How do we work to fix this?
That's right. I mean, you look at the problem and you look for what you can do about it. And if you absolutely determine you can't do anything about it, then you find one that you can do something about. And you have, there's some things you can't fix, and you go on to the next thing instead of getting immobilized by what you can't do. And so that spirit is something that I'm deeply grateful for, because as we live in the 21st century, it's easy to get immobilized instead of looking for how we can be, active and actually make change.
Kathryn, we've got these questions we're going to be asking both you and Pamela, because so many of our viewers and attendees at these institutes are younger folk who are really looking to elders like yourselves as mentors and great examples that you are. One of the really interesting things that we've observed among younger folk is that feminism is sort of it's conflicted terrain. On one hand, both young women and men take the gains of feminism for granted and sort of assume those gains, and yet don't always recognize or appreciate the movement, what that took, and what does it mean today. So we wanted to ask both you and Pamela, how did both feminism and womanism as movements affect you both as an academic and as an activist coming up?
Yes. Well, when I was younger, survival was at the top of my list, and that meant having food, having shoes, having clothes, having whatever it was I needed. And I went to college kind of with that kind of in that survival mode. So and then I got very conscious about race and got involved a lot in race during my college years. So it wasn't really until I got to graduate school that I really started paying attention to this intersection between race and gender. And I, and then maybe that was the first time I really had the space in my head and heart to even consider any other form of oppression, because I was still not so sure I was going to make it in the world, and I was really preoccupied with that. And as I've reflected on the whole notion of womanism or feminism, or the more, maybe more correctly for me, it's just the whole notion that everybody should be treated in an equal fashion, no matter what your gender is, no matter what your race is, no matter what your class is. And the more I've reflected upon all of this, it's quite clear to me that you cannot claim to be interested in liberation of one thing like race or class and not claim to want to have liberation for gender or the aged or the people with physical limitations. I love what Dr. King said about not splitting up your morals. So it didn't take me long as a graduate student to come to the realization that I wasn't splitting those things up, that I'm working on, they intersect, race, class, gender, they all intersect, and I care about all of them. And maybe I'll be more focused in one area than another area, but whatever I'm doing, I must always be conscious about all kinds of oppression. I don't get to choose. You either are caring about and trying to destabilize all oppression, or else you're just playing a game with yourself. And so that's kind of where I've come with this. I was very aggravated at white women for their interest in feminism and their lack of interest in racial equality. And the kind of, in grad school, I ran into many white women who felt like, well, we're women and that's all they have to care about. They don't have to care about racial equality. And that's totally unacceptable to me. Don't talk to me about caring about me as a woman if you don't care about me as a black woman. Because when the day is over, I'm still a black woman and you're not if you're white, so that got really clear for me, those intersections, and how I had to be committed to that, to understanding that and never compromising on the necessity to bring to bring all oppressed people into the liberation room, rather than picking a group and trying to stand in one place rather than standing with everybody. It's more complicated when you do that. If you just choose and go off on one little side, that's a bit simpler than when you understand that you really have to be inclusive and always paying attention to those intersections. And it makes life harder. And so I understand why people try not to do it, but it's totally unacceptable to me. For myself, I have to really be, I think, always willing to be speaking for liberation across the board, no matter whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's class, whether it's for people that are older or for people that have disabilities or whatever. So it took a while to get there, and so I can understand young people sometimes struggling with, well, where am I going to be with this? Where am I going to be in this equation? But I think where you have to be is in the space of unity, period.
Your commitment to this, to working at the intersections of oppression, what we are interested in hearing about, and again, we want to just give teasers about what is to come at the February Institute, but wanting to invite you to talk about one or two things in your social justice career that have been the most significant.
Well, I think, Elaine, working in the prison, I think, as a young professor before I had a family, I taught. We had a prison program at Mercer University where I was teaching, and I taught in the prison, and I had such wonderful students, and it was such a different atmosphere for me. And for one thing, I had not ever been in prisons before I started teaching, and so I was a little bit nervous about it. But I was a single person, so and I was a little bit not too concerned about myself, but then it wasn't the same as going in the classroom on the campus. But I went anyway, and I used to tell my students I was there to get myself out of prison, which I don't think they really understood. But that was how I saw it. And so I taught there for several years, and it was very liberating for me to go and be with people who had to find ways inside themselves to be free because their physical freedom had been taken away from them. It also gave me a great opportunity to pay attention to my own kinds of psychological imprisonment. And so it was very transformative for me. And it helped me really to understand that a lot of your social justice effort is about getting yourself out of prison. And not just what to get over that notion of what you're doing for other people, but what you really, and to it made me pay more attention to what am I doing for myself. And it makes me a better social justice activist because I can get off of my high horse. I need to be liberated too. And so I think that was the most profound thing early in my life. And then later in my life, when I worked as a loan executive in the mayor's office, I worked with women who had lost children to violence. And we call those women mourning mothers, mourning as in mourning when somebody has died. There were about 50 of them. And that was the toughest 2 years I have ever spent in my life, working with those women and trying to help them be able to recollect themselves after losing mostly their children to violence. And it was very painful, but it was also incredibly transformative.
Thank you. Yeah.
You are, Elaine and I had a chance to hear you talk a little bit about your current work with the Diocese of Atlanta. Before you say a word about that as a teaser for what you're going to talk about more next month, can you say just a little bit about how you came to the Episcopal Church, what that tradition means to you, and how you have struggled within that denomination and within that diocese for faith and justice?
Well, yes, I went. I was baptized in a Baptist church when I was a little kid, and then I was in a Church of Christ, and so I've had a kind of funny religious journey. But when I started going to the Episcopal Church, I was going to some of the classes and things that they offered, and I really discovered that the Episcopal Church allowed you to bring your brain to church, that you could think, there was support for the life of the mind, and that was very, very important to me. So I would go to these Jung meetings and dream workshops, and then I decided, well, if they host this kind of thing, maybe I'd like to go to the service. And then I went to the service, and it didn't take me long. I loved the liturgy. And after I went for a few months to the Episcopal Church, I would wake up in the middle of the night and the liturgy would be running through my head, which was just had never happened before in my life. So it was such an affirmation to me that this was the right place to be, and that I was this church would nurture the kind of quest I had for spiritual formation, which I had not encountered anyplace else. So that's been a great delight and a great gift to have it. And of course, I have to be very honest. Organized religion is not my most favorite cup of tea, but you do have to have some kind of container to do your work within. It's just easier if you have a bit of a container and you're not just out hanging on a limb trying to do good work. So it's a helpful container, and it's been a good place for me. I've been an Episcopalian now for over
and so
35
that has brought you
years. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're lagging just a little bit, but we're going
Should we ask about the picture?
to persevere on here.
Okay.
So you've gotten into doing work at the diocesan level around racial justice. Say a little bit about the project that you're working on right now.
Well, 3 years ago, I took over the chairing of our diocesan commission for dismantling racism, which is called the Beloved Commission, Beloved Community, Commission for Dismantling Racism. And our commission is charged with doing dismantling racism workshops and other kinds of programs in the diocese. So we have been going to Alabama, to Hayneville, Alabama, to the Jonathan Daniels pilgrimage for the last 3 years. And Jonathan Daniels, the young white seminarian who was murdered in Alabama about 50 years ago now. And I decided that at the 50th anniversary of Jonathan Daniels' martyrdom, that we as a diocese needed to do something more than just keep going back to Alabama to commemorate Jonathan's murder, that we needed to look at some things within Georgia, to look at martyrdom. Where could we find instances of martyrdom in Georgia? And one of the major places is around the lynching tree. We had 531 lynchings in Georgia, and those people were lynched, and mostly nothing has ever been said about them, and nothing has been done to acknowledge what that was all about and what impact it has upon us. And that kind of trauma doesn't go away just because you act like it didn't happen. So we're launching a 3-year cycle of pilgrimages to lynching sites starting this fall. And we will be holding memorial services at those sites and placing markers and raising those people, no matter what the reason for their lynching. We're not concerning ourselves with that. We're concerning ourselves with the fact that they were lynched. And we're going to have these memorial services and work on seeing if we can uncover some healing energy that will help us as we try to move forward with racial healing in this state. And we think that this will start some conversations, will open up some doors, will allow for us to make some progress around race relations that maybe we couldn't make if we don't do this. And so, and it's a big task and it's a little daunting, but I believe that those kinds of traumatizing events having happened when they did, the energy from them continue to live in us in the 21st century. And this might help us with assuaging some of that pain and sorrow that doesn't get talked about. We try to sweep it under the rug and go on to liberation, and we haven't done it. And I think we need to quit trying to act like we've done it and just maybe take some steps back. So I'm really looking forward to it. And at first people kind of looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I was talking about let's go do this, but it's starting to make sense to people. And there's this, and what we're doing is connecting slavery, lynching, mass incarceration, and the death penalty. Those intersections are very clearly there, and we need to pay attention to them, and then we need to look at how they are intersecting and how we are still living in so much of that energy system that made lynching possible in the first place.
I was just going to say, this is such powerful historical truth-telling that, we have lived under this denial and, just not wanting to wrestle with this piece of our history, which I, so believe is central to our healing. So you are powerfully pioneering another way that we can do this restorative justice or truth and healing. And then if we can do that truth and healing and justice work, maybe then we can talk about reconciliation. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Work.
Yes.
This is really significant work nationally. Kathryn is on the cutting edge of a movement to reclaim history and to revise and re-narrate history from the perspective of victims and the marginalized. And you have the opportunity to come hear her and be a witness to this and to help support Kathryn in this work. So that's really one of the highlights that we're looking forward to. We've got, I think, one more question for you, Kathryn, more along the lines of the personal.
Yeah.
All right.
We've been talking about intersections and wondering how you integrate the personal and political disciplines in your life. How do you work at integrating spiritual practices and lifestyle choices and to be able to do the work that you are doing?
Yeah, that's such a wonderful question. And of course, everybody who makes any effort to do this know what a dance it is. And some days you do better than others with it. But I think overall, I have a deep commitment to simplicity. And simplicity in the way I live. I live in a small apartment. I got rid of my house. I go to the Goodwill to shop. I live in a capitalist world, but I'm not committed to capitalism. So, I give away a lot of things and do a lot of practicing of letting go, both in the actuality of giving away books and clothes and things that I actually thought I couldn't live without. I sometimes give those away too. So I think if I had to try to sum this up without talking all night, I'd say my commitment to silence and simplicity and creativity and I try to incorporate those things across my life, no matter what I'm doing. I try to be mindful of simplicity in my work and not to make things bigger issues than they already are, but to try to stay with simplicity. And creativity keeps me from going crazy. So I make greeting cards. I make candles. I like to put all kinds of different kinds of clothes together. I really, really want to be in touch with being an artist. And I see the political or the public and the private really have to be in concert with each other and be informing one another. So I don't separate that too much. So I think it's taken me a while to get here, but the older I get, the more I have this sense about being in that space, and it makes me have a lot more peace than I've ever had before in my life. So I'm deeply grateful for that. And the peace is a great affirmation that I'm on the right track, regardless of whether I'm going out to protest something or writing a column or sitting in my room reading Howard Thurman or writing in my journal.
Well, you are a great gift to the movement, and you will be a great gift to our institute, Kathryn. I know you are also a great gift to the Open Door community from where you are broadcasting tonight. In conclusion, can you just maybe say a quick word about you have a long-standing relationship with the with our friends at the Open Door. Do you want to say a word about that?
Yes, I do. I met Ed and Murphy when they were just beginning the Open Door. And then I went off to Macon and became a professor and went to grad school and did a lot of things. And then when I retired, I finally moved to Atlanta after living in Macon 41 years, which is really like being in the wilderness. I say all the time I have the Israelites beat for their wilderness experience because I lived in Macon, Georgia. But after I retired and moved to Atlanta, I was able to reconnect with the folks at the Open Door, with Ed and Murphy and the people here. And for the last 3 years, I've been quite involved here with volunteering for the soup kitchen and leading classes and helping with worship, doing everything but actually sleeping here every night. To be quite frank, I'd sometimes say, "My goodness, I'm here almost as much as folks who live here." But I love the Open Door. It's very important in my life, and they tell me that I'm important in their lives, and I believe that. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm deeply grateful for this place and for the way in which it's been gift to me.
Well, thank you for being with us, and we're going to switch gears now, but we are so grateful that you have taken the time tonight to be with us and inspire people to come hear more from you and learn more from you.
Well, thank you all, and I can't wait to see you in February.
Oh, us too, Katherine. Thank you for joining us. And we know you're going to stay on for our conversation with Pam. And if there's a few minutes, maybe we'll open it up at the end and there can be a conversation between Pam and Katherine.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so let's
right.
plan on that. But also, Katherine, we know it's late on the East Coast. So if you have to step off, that is also okay.
No, I'm all right for now anyway. So
okay. Wonderful.
Very good. Well, sitting here like a rose between two thorns is a colleague and a friend and a companion on the journey. Pamela Brubaker is Professor Emerita of Religion and Ethics, as Elaine said earlier, at California Lutheran University. Cal Lutheran is the closest major Christian higher education institution in our county to us, and so we've been delighted to be developing a relationship with CLU over the last few years. Pam has been a professor there for a long time, and actually many years ago invited me to come speak
one of my classes.
At one of her classes, and that began our occasional collaboration. The other thing that Pam is known to our circles for is her deep involvement with World Council of Churches colloquia and gatherings all over the world in which movement organizers and clergy and professors get together to strategize about these intersectional liberation movements that Katherine was talking about. And we're hoping that Pamela will talk a little bit about that. She's still currently working with some of these World Council of Churches consultations. She also is locally rooted here in Ventura County, and she serves on the advisory board of the local chapter of Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, with whom we work a lot. Her books include Globalization at What Price? Economic Change and Daily Life. So Pamela has been one of the early voices of critique around capitalist globalization and the consolidation of economic blocs around the world and that's impact on poor and marginalized people. She also has taught in feminist studies and feminist religion, and her 1994 book, Women Don't Count, The Challenge of Women's Poverty to Christian Ethics, is another of her major publications. What she really is a professor, now retired, but still active, who is a friend of social movements. And that is, as is Katherine. And frankly, friends, that's increasingly rare. in the academy. So we have with us tonight two terrific examples of people working in higher education and yet keeping a foot firmly grounded in social movements. So welcome, Pamela. We're so delighted to have you join us
I'm delighted
tonight.
to be here. Thank you, Chet.
All right. Elaine, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. Well, and again, we're going to put the same questions to Pam that we put to Katherine. And so we would very much like to hear about your journey of faith and what the early influences were, and then, the women who have mentored you on that journey.
Okay, thank you. Well, Katherine, I'm going to be 70 in April, so we're very close together in age. That was interesting to learn. And oops. I grew up on a family farm in southwestern Ohio. We were fortunate enough, white privileged, to have land that had been in our family since 1837. So it was very rooted in this small farm in this rural county, about all white. Not even too many mainline churches. We had no Episcopal churches. We had Baptist, Church of God. Methodist was about the most mainline that we had. There was one Roman Catholic church. And then I was born and raised in the Church of the Brethren, so come out of the Anabaptist tradition. And that really shaped me and my journey in very meaningful ways. So I would look to the church, even though it's broken my heart at some points along the way. But as that early age, my father was a conscientious objector during the Second World War. And there weren't many from our community. So even though we're a historic peace church, like my mother and father grew up in the same town. My father was an only child. My mom came from a family of 11. Her brothers either one was, I think, an optometrist by the time the war came, but the others did serve. So this was very interesting in my, parents' family. But amazingly and beautifully, they all related well and understood and supported each other around those choices. But I remember in church when my mom can't believe, well, she's gone now, but that I remembered this. She died in 2010, that one of my cousins closer to my age in Sunday school called my dad a yellow-bellied coward. So I knew that even though I was, not born until after the war, my father, being an only child, his extended family were the people he was in these civilian public service camps with. And there, he did not go to college, but he was a man who was a deep thinker, intellectual, and read a lot, like Harry Emerson Fosdick and that, and how really, I know I'm supposed to talk about women who nurtured me, and there are many, but my father nurtured my intellect. I was the oldest of four, and I'm really grateful for that. My mother was very influential also. She was a full-time homemaker, and as a farm wife, sometimes drove tractors and trucks. I drove a tractor when I was 6 years old and tried to milk a cow. So this sense of being rooted in the land and seeing the families, love and care for the land has stayed with me, even though I've lived mainly in urban environments. So when I think about one of my classes when I was working on my master's, we were to do an ethical autobiography. And that was really helpful to think about what helped shape us. And what came to my mind were songs that I sang in Sunday school. So, we sang, the B-I-B-L-E and Jesus loves me. But the one that really made an impact on me and was my favorite was Jesus Loves Little Children. all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. So even though I grew up in this all-white environment, I had this imagination of all these children, of all these colors around the world that were somehow a part of this family. And then when I was 6 years old, one of my mother's cousins, who was a lifelong missionary in India, mainly as education and working with women in rural villages, was on sabbatical and lived with us for a while. And she taught me a little song, Esutina Nam, Jesus is the name, taught me how to make my numbers in an Indian script, and got me an Indian pen pal. So I can see my interest in global issues in that really goes back to being, that time, that song, and then my mother's cousin, and then she would write to me, and I wrote to Grace, my pen pal, all through school. When I was 10, I went forward during the call to the altar and was baptized. Our tradition practiced adult baptism. And when I look back on that, I understood that as making a commitment to follow the way of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount is so important in our traditions. So not just love of neighbor, but love of enemy. The pacifism that comes in from that, and then the parable of the Last Judgment. So I feel like that's what I've tried to do all these years, even though at times some others think I'm kind of straying from that path as I struggle with some of the, my sister came out as a lesbian in 1971. I've been an ally. That's where the church has broke my heart the most. And we still aren't really very accepting and inclusive there. It was also, I loved when Katherine talked about school, and I did like school, but I learned about what was happening in the world from television and our Sunday school papers. So I learned about what was happening in the South and in the movement from my Sunday school papers. We didn't talk about that in our school. And when I was in 8th grade, I wrote this paper unassigned in social studies saying, how do we live in a country where we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we say we believe in liberty and justice for all, and people are fighting and dying, African-American people, for the right to vote? To me, that was just a real, contradiction. So I was struggling with that through the Sunday school papers, which I'm grateful for. So then I was very active in the Church of the Brethren Youth Fellowship at the district level. Got involved there in some early anti-war protest. Went to Hazard, Kentucky, in Appalachia, where we had a small congregation on a work camp. And in our county, we didn't have really rich people, and we didn't have terribly poor people. I called it more genteel poverty. I saw harsh poverty in Appalachia, and that really stirred my interest in working for economic justice in deep ways. Then when I just want to go through early adulthood. When I went off to college, I went to a Church of the Brethren college for 2 years. But the summer of 1965, at the encouragement of the campus minister, I went to Chicago as a part of a college program by what was called the Ecumenical Institute, and this had really been sponsored by the World Council of Churches. There's one in Basel, Switzerland, but there was one in Chicago, and this is getting a little ahead, so I'll stop and I'll come back to this when you ask me about feminism and womanism. But I guess the point I'm wanting to make is that up until the time I was about 19 or 20, I was well nourished. I think got a deep sense of a commitment to justice, to peace, and knew about the world, but only through stories and media. I was in a fairly sheltered world. And in that, my mother, we had a district youth worker, Rosie Buck, who was my first exposure to, she wasn't ordained, although we did ordain women, but, you know, a woman working full-time in the church. Yeah. And then I mentioned my mother's cousin, my mother, my aunts who were school teachers. So my mother didn't go to college but 1 year, but I had aunts who were teachers. Yeah.
The Ecumenical Institute, a venerable hotbed of faith-based activism in the 60s and 70s,
Yes.
and right until very recent days in Chicago. So you're saying that was where you were first exposed to sort of gender politics?
Right, gender politics, and also to the struggle in the Islam struggle in Chicago. So it was where I really began to understand intersectionality. So the feminism piece, you know, I remember when I babysat for one of my aunts that she was reading Betty Friedan's A Feminine Mystique, but she never really talked about it, you know, to me. And I was a sociology major in college, but it was at the Ecumenical Institute the summer of '65 that one of the women who was a part of the Institute, we spent the mornings learning. They would give us, go read Marx, go read Freud, come back in an hour with this all outlined, and then we're going to talk about it. And in the afternoon, we were like out in the community trying to help organize. We were a little naive. And then we were also doing like rehab work. It was a really rich program. So she talked about Simone de Beauvoir and the second sex. That was, I feel like, my real introduction to feminist theory. So it was in this radical Christian setting, but, you know, de Beauvoir was not religious. But one of the things that struck me, she was a pastor's wife, and she said that women could not think, particularly pastors' wives, that their men were the ones who stood before God for them, that we had to stand before God ourselves. That was very empowering because I was married for 17 years to a man who was a pastor and went through seminary, and it was where I first experienced gender discrimination by the church. I'd been nourished up to the time, you know, I was in college, but when I married a seminarian, all these expectations about who I was to be, to support him. They had special classes for women where you learned how to be a good pastor's wife, how to entertain. I wouldn't take the class. I was the rebel. But it was also there that the Islam's movement had invited Dr. King and the SCLC to come to Chicago. They were there that summer. We were living in the neighborhood where they were based. Had the opportunity to hear him speak. I had one of the Bevel brothers come and talk to us about organizing, and we were out there. We were a mainly white group. The staff at the Institute was more integrated than our group. But so now the things that I only, you know, learned about, we were involved in, and it was so eye-opening. And hearing King, but at the same time, the Black Power movement beginning and saying, we need to do this. We don't need white people to do this for us. So thinking about all this and how you make these connections. And of course, we were in the poorest neighborhood in all of Chicago, dealing with all that. So that was like a key period for me in my life. And then also being exposed ecumenically. I never heard a creed until I was 18 years old. But we would have these awesome services where we would sing praise God to all kinds of different music and have these new creeds and write these manifestos. So that was a key time, not just the feminism, but can I talk about womanism too?
Sure.
Yeah. So I was introduced to womanism at Union Theological Seminary, where I did my PhD. I went there in '82, and there was an amazing group of women students, one of whom was Dolores Williams, and then Katie Cannon, had graduated from Union and was working with some of us in a feminist ethics consultation, getting us, we were mainly white graduate students and some professors, Beth Harrison, to, as a part of our yearly weekend seminar or retreat. No, we called it, we didn't call it retreat, we called it an advance anyway, to read African American women's literature. And Katie was just so powerful. Like, one of the things I remember from her, and where she really moved me personally, and I think, and helped me in teaching, like unlearning racism and other forms of, oppression that we've been inculcated in us, is the first time we did this, everybody read the book and she stands up and wants to lead the discussion. And we all sat there, we're afraid to say anything. And Katie's very perceptive, and she said, okay, look, I know you all, you're afraid you're going to say something stupid. She said, you will say something stupid, but we'll still love you. And it opened that up for us, to take the risk, to say things that were stupid, feeling that even though she was going to challenge us, it was done out of this sense of love. And so reading her work, reading Dolores Williams, so I think it was pretty clear fairly early on, like having feminism at the Ecumenical Institute, but also then being deeply involved in not civil rights, economic rights struggles, seeing the intersectionality, coming up against my own racism, learning to unlearn that, the class issues. And I've tried to do that then throughout my career, to hold those intersections together. The group of women also included Autumn Maria Isasi Diaz, who developed Mujerista theology, Hyun Kyung Chung, who did Asian feminist theology. So we were encouraged by Beverly Harrison, our mentor, to collaborate, and that was really rich. We also had a race, sex, and class group of people that worked at what was called the God Box, the National Council of Churches, and people at Union. We were doing that a part as Theology in America, so that was very important. Yeah, very important.
You have focused quite a bit on economic justice issues in both your scholarship and your activism. And actually, Pamela was one of the few, if not only, academics in the about 10, 15 years ago to work with us on Sabbath economics collaboration and education, because she saw that as cohering with the work she was doing. Why has economics been so central for you, and what would you say is one of the central expressions of that in your work?
Okay. Well, I was influenced, this isn't too controversial, but I was influenced by Marxism. And, I think early on, critical of capitalism. And I took courses in Christian Marxist dialogue at the master's level. And then I took courses in economics at the New School for Social Research in New York that taught both neoclassical and Marxist economics. And then feminist economics, I had some introduction to that there. So I, in part by reading Gramsci with Cornel West, learned that Marx himself doesn't take, culture and all that richness of life. He makes the economic too strong in terms of being determining. But there still seems to me that if we talk about survival, which, Katherine was talking about, or how we make a livelihood, it's about economics. And it is, I think, so foundational as a significant aspect of that undergirds or intersects with racism, with patriarchy, with different forms of oppression. And I think it's funny because I had economics as an undergraduate at it was neoclassical, and I thought it was so boring. But then when I was at Roosevelt and doing sociology there, got introduced more to like European sociology, social theory, where you looked at economics, and then at Union taking these courses at the New School. So for me, if you look at so much, I mean, you're one of the people who talked about this and others, but they say if you took about Jesus' teachings about economics, there wouldn't be a lot left in the New Testament, right? So to me, it was just so clear. And I liked it then when I got into these other forms of economics, and I felt like it was a way to try to bring together an aspect that in the academy, in the field of Christian ethics, people will sometimes talk about classism, but I think classism doesn't fully capture the importance of like economics and how we organize our life and what happened with neoclassical and neoliberalism, where you create this economic man, and that's a deep challenge to our Christian understanding, or I think of any of the world space understanding of what it means to be human. And so then both doing the critique of the dominant system, which is, as Harvey Cox said, it makes the market God. It can become a type of religion, I think is so important. And then the work on alternatives, like you all are doing with the Sabbath economics, the Jubilee, the watershed discipleship. And then as we became more and more aware about climate, issues, climate change, and all these environmental issues, the economic system drives so much of that too. Yeah.
So you've had a lot of World Council of Churches experience. What do you think has been the most interesting and exciting of those consultations over the years?
Wow, that's a hard question. I suppose it was when there was, can I briefly describe it? There was this, this story in itself is interesting. In 1998, the assembly that the World Council has every 7 years was in Zimbabwe. And they've looked at economic issues, but what we call globalization was not on the agenda. And it was the churches of the global South, particularly from Africa, we were in Africa, that were saying, this globalization is killing us. We need the churches to work on this and to speak up. So a project was started with Rogati Mshana, a Lutheran economist and a practicing Christian from Tanzania. That I love it. He's an economist, but this shows his faith. Took the acronym AGAPE, Alternative Globalization Addressing People on the Earth. From the beginning, bringing that together and using the story of Zacchaeus for what we're called to do. Repent and a form of reparations or making things right, and that generosity and, really foregrounding that and having these consultations. Chad talked about one in each region, and then there would be there was an international steering committee. I wasn't a part of that, but then they would invite guests. So I was at different ones of those, and each one produced documents and plans. I remember one that struck me, and each one included indigenous peoples from the region, women. There was a place for women to bring in women's perspectives, feminists, not just feminists, but those perspectives. But for the Asian Pacific, the Pacific Islanders say, we see poverty. You think we're poor, because you see poverty as not having things. We think that people that don't have rich relationships are poor. You know, they're not saying you don't, you know, have things that you need for survival, but just totally shifting the ground there. So then in 2012 in Indonesia, the work from all these consultations came together. And we talked a lot about, work drafted an urgent call to the churches and committed to ourselves to the changes, you know, we need to make in our lives, but also challenging the structures that International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, as well as then accompanying struggles. Each consultation would include a day of where we were immersed in the struggles in the community. So it wasn't just in our heads. It wasn't just, you know, theology. It was really informed, and people from the activist groups were key participants.
You want to ask the personal and political?
I do, you know, because both of you, the amount of work and the call and the traveling and all that you are committed to, this question of integrating the personal and the political disciplines in your life, and really what comes up too is how do we combat, or how do you combat the burnout and all of those. So I'd love for you just to reflect a little bit on that.
That was the hardest one for when I was thinking about it when I first saw it. But the way you ask it helps it. Like, I have said different times that the things I've done, trying to be like an ally, accompanying, you know, being a friend, because I am, you know, as Katherine is, an academic in part, as an important part of I am, that I've always received so much. I've been so nourished there. So it's never like a sacrifice to go, to be able to share and hear. And sometimes people, like in Colombia, this was a part of a different organization, Peace for Life, interfaith organization. But anyway, these women told the story of being pushed off the land, you know, by militias. And they were living in shacks, and they didn't know what was going to happen. And they said, please don't forget our story. You know, just the fact of listening. And I'm learning so much from trauma, like from Elaine and Elaine's work, because I thought a lot about truth and reconciliation, but I hadn't really looked much at trauma. But you could see the trauma they were experiencing, and to have their story heard and then to share that story. But the struggle always is, particularly when one's working globally, and you see the connections between these places, but it's not the kind of deep solidarity or involvement that you have like an open door. So I struggle with that a lot. You know, how do I keep that from just being symbolic or empty? How do you maintain what you might call, like, in a way, an imagined community? I mean, there are points when you meet in the flesh, but then also make the connections, like the Clue and what's doing in the county. And I would talk about that. We were working a lot on living wages, immigrant right issues, sanctuary movements, and try to bring that and share that, because sometimes people think that from watching television, you know, everyone in the U.S. is very wealthy, and to see some of the struggles that we share. I also, my friend Hyun Kyung teaches walking meditation, and I've never taken her class, but when I describe how I walk, she tells me I do walking meditation. So I try to walk every day and outdoors and be really present and hear. I don't listen to anything, you know, and really feel and experience this beautiful creation on Sally McFay, you know, God's body, and be present in that. And that nourishes me so much. So it's having the human connections, but also this deep connection. And at times I think the earth is crying out to us, you know. That's a part of when the brothers killed each other, the earth cries out. So to try to never, because of some of, you know, the class and race privilege I have, I think at times I can't imagine that I would ever really be happy doing it. But, you know, I think, well, why do I keep doing this? But it's like, it's where I feel most alive and most connected, and where the times I've experienced the power of the Spirit the most has been in this work. I'll be honest, I'm not real active in a congregation. I don't find one, you know, the liturgy, maybe too much of the Anabaptist, I don't know. But in community, coming here, yeah.
We're almost at the end of our time, and I'm wondering, it seems like a great way to round this out would be to ask Pamela if she has a question for Kathryn.
Wow.
Stayed faithfully to
Thank you, Kathryn. I'm touched.
Yes.
Touched. Well, I guess you mentioned a family, so being a mother of sons and a grandmother of granddaughters has been an important part of my life, and that helps bring me some joy. But I also have extended family and people who there's no blood relationship. So how does that factor into your life?
Oh, well, I have I had 9 sisters and brothers, so there was a big family of us, and then I have 2 sons.
Okay.
So my sons live now here in Atlanta, where I'm living, so that's quite wonderful. Most of my family lives in California, and I'll be seeing them when I come out for the institute, and actually celebrating my 70th birthday with them while I'm out there. So family is very important to me, and I have a bunch of people that are as closer than some of the people that I'm blood kin with, because we have spiritual kinship.
Right.
So I think, you know, having that and it's the community that keeps you from going off into 1,000 little pieces in the midst of the work you're trying to do. Both the community of family, blood family, and then your spiritual family. So it's very, very, very important to me, and very important to me to be family for other people as well.
Right. Yeah.
So doesn't that just make you want to come out here next month to be family with these righteous women, these grandmothers in the faith and in the struggle, who will be together for 5 days, wrestling these issues. What a great privilege and opportunity. Thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, and
Well, thank you.
I just feel so what is coming up to me in this invitation for people to join us is to sit at your 2's feet and be mentored and pastored and loved and welcomed even deeper into this community of struggle for our humanity and for justice. And I am just very grateful to the 2 of you and for the conversations that we will have together in February. So yes, people, please come.
Yes, I'm looking so forward to it. So
To be continued, and guess what? You get to join us to celebrate Kathryn's 70th birthday.
Yes.
And we might as well throw Pamela's birthday in there too. Great milestone. That'll be lovely.
yes.
Kathryn, I'm just wondering if I could prevail on you to maybe just say a little benediction or prayer of some kind to bring our
Of course.
time to.
Well, I before I do that, let me just say how much I appreciate the work that you and Elaine do Jed, and that you all are making all this possible. That's a great gift, because this kind of logistical stuff is not something I would ever do, and so it's just marvelous to have this opportunity. And so I would just say, thank you, God, for the blessings of this day, and for the ways in which we have been given the grace to use our minds and hearts and spirits to create the beloved community, and to create it wherever we can find it. And that I would ask that God would continue to give us faith and hope and courage to go forward and to be the people that we were put on the earth to be. And just thanks be to God.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Pamela.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kathryn.
It was delightful. So glad to be a part of it.
Yes.
You've got a few days left to still get in on the early bird deadline, and until February 5th to register for the Institute. Come join us. Come join these fine women and the community that will gather here. If you can't, do join us. You see in the chat box there, Chris has put up our next webinar will be live from the Bartimaeus Institute on Tuesday the 16th at the special time of 3:45 Pacific time. So that's a little bit more reasonable for the East Coast folk. That'll be another opportunity. But tonight has been a wonderful glimpse into two of our very special guests. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks everybody for joining us.